All right, Christofer here. Welcome to Do Explain. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my current supporters who inspire me to carry on with this project and make it financially viable as well. I'm very grateful to all of you. Big hugs. And while I'm not in the business of telling people what to do, I can share my vision for Do Explain going forward. I like to work on the podcast full time instead of just a few days a month. I want to build a real platform for the fun and friendly exchange of interesting ideas, and I want to do it ad-free if possible, because I don't want any ideas to be off limits for us to explore, and I also want to keep saying dumb shit without repercussions. But to do this, I'll need a steady income, and that's why I need your help. So if you enjoy what I'm doing here, and you want to join me in my vision and become a part of growing this project, consider going over to patreon.com/doexplain and sign up to become a monthly supporter. All right, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, so I'm back for third time's the charm with Marek Doyle. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not so bad. And yourself?
Yeah, no, I'm doing great. And for listeners, I was just praising Marek, the software where we're recording right now. You get to choose your own pronouns, and Marek very humbly chose impressive, which I really like. No fake humility there. That's great.
Well, I wasn't expecting it to be a topic of conversation, but I guess now it's out in the public, I'll have to stand behind it. So let me see if I can live up to that.
Yeah, I'm not the irrevocably curious dickhead for no reason, right?
Well, there you go. There's a title.
You got it. Yeah, Marek, so I'm going to resist the temptation to dive into your favorite topic of Love Island UK today. But I will put in the caveat that I still, 2 years later, find it to be, in terms of comedic value, one of the top shows that I've ever watched.
I'm happy to report I've never watched it, and I have no intention to watch it. I think hearing people talk about it is enough to know it's not for me.
That's fair enough, too. So yeah, let's dive into the impressive stuff here. I have spent quite a lot of episodes recently on this podcast talking about and raving about the value of different introspective techniques. Mm-hmm. I usually refer to it as emotional processing or somatic release practices in my own case. Mm-hmm. And something that I feel is often missing in this discourse, or at least heavily underemphasized, is the role of physiology when it comes to succeeding in any of these techniques. And you conveniently just released a new article with the title, or the main title, "Why Can't I Meditate?" And in that article, you very thoroughly make the case that physiology matters a lot. And it's specifically geared towards the clientele that you work with, so people who have metabolic dysregulation, different type of stress disorders, people like myself. And I would argue that the general principles still apply. And so my hope is that we can dive deeper into the contents of the article there and try to gear it towards the general listener, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Before we do that, however, I would like to mention that I have an anecdote on the podcast that I've brought up several times, a personal anecdote. And it's the story of when I went to Oxford to meet David Deutsch for the first time.
I've heard this anecdote.
You have, yes. And so I met David, and he was very, very impressive presence, but it was also very tangible that he felt like he was a brain and then just riding around in a body. It was very, very interesting and strong sense of that. And then after that, I went to have some burritos with yours truly. And I was very, very shocked by the difference in how I perceived you and the vibe that you gave off, which was, and I'm just realizing yours truly is probably referring to me. I'm referring to Marek here. You had a very strong embodied vibe. It's the best way I can describe it. You felt extremely grounded, very present in that. And yeah, I have to say that kind of inspired me to dive deeper into this journey myself. And I've spent a lot of time trying to model that same type of vibe. But so I'd be curious just to hear briefly how you got into introspection and different type of emotional work in your own case, and how that has affected your life and the person that you are today.
Okay, let me see what I can do to succinctly answer that question. Yeah. So I spent a long time being infallible and being invulnerable to the unnecessary fuss that came with feeling things that weren't necessarily pleasant. So that was a really nice setup until, of course, as it always does, it came to a crashing halt. And all that really required for that stack of cards to come tumbling down was to get 2 hits on my spine in the same week whilst also living in a mouldy flat. And so age 27, I had my first night of insomnia ever. And that in itself was quite enlightening and made me realize, this is what people talk about. But naturally, having thought of, well, I can link the triggers to the outcomes, and therefore I need to get out of this flat, and I need to tend to the injuries and undertake some postural rehab, which I did, and it was extremely helpful, but it was nowhere near enough. It didn't restore me to where I was at. So I find myself in this interim position that things are better. My sleep's still not sorted. I'm definitely well below where I should be at. And it's a case of, a variety of clues just popping into my awareness from a variety of different sources that maybe I hadn't actually got everything worked out. Because if I actually looked at the world fairly rather than simply creating a different framework to create a more advantageous judgment of it all, things won't work in the way they should do. And so I thought to myself, okay, maybe there's a little bit more to this. I specifically remember one occasion back when I was a single man living in London and enjoying it. I was in a bar and I saw a young lady that I thought I would like to talk to this young lady. And I hear my inner dialogue saying, right, confident mode on. And I thought to myself, why would I need to put on a confident mode? What does that say? And that was something I sat with for a little while, and then the universe comes to me and, somebody tells me about how amazing response they'd had to holotropic breathwork. And I thought, cool, well, this is not necessarily where I'd ever imagined going into. And, had a little Google search, still used Google in those days. And sure enough, there was a course in 8 days' time, weekend retreats, and they only did them twice a year at that point. I thought, well, here we go. Let's get involved. So I did. And it was very, very interesting and made a huge impact in terms of physical tension before versus afterwards. I had a very noticeable experience in the second session on the second day, whereby, really sort of felt my diaphragm and my ribs prizing open. Very, very painful, but also it was very clear right from the very start that this was a good pain. It needed to happen. But yeah, that pretty much dumped, this reality at my door that clearly the physiology, the psychology, the emotions, the physical tension, they were all very much intertwined. And I've obviously spent quite some years since unpacking it all into an order that can not only be understood by everyday humans, but also that can be deployed reliably to predict where somebody's going to get with or without certain support, but also, and most importantly, to make it very clear what each individual is going to need to do. And generally what that means is if there's been many, many years of severe and complex metabolic challenges, we're not going to solve it with just pills and tidying up the diet. There's normally going to be some deeper layers that we're going to need to investigate and ultimately undertake processes that rewire the brain and the brain's reflex responses, which I hope sounds like it's an obvious thing to do. Although the way that both mainstream and alternative therapies tend to go about these things doesn't reflect that.
Yeah. First comment is I'd love that you got into this because of a pickup situation. That's lovely, and I hadn't heard about that before. It's often a very great medium to try out your supposed spiritual insight or emotional progress, to go into those situations because they're such high pressure usually, those type of social situations, and being rejected by someone you're dearly attracted to can often be quite devastating to your self-image. And I would say being in a serious relationship and being rejected by a person you thoroughly love and want to be with is even more so. But
it's
I like
fascinating how we have a strong evolutionary aversion to these scenarios whereby social rejection can occur. Social rejection is intimately linked to our genetic lineage dying out. It's a big deal. And so, I think it's very understandable that it's a higher stakes game than it would necessarily appear on the surface. And equally, I think one of the magical things in that zone, which became thoroughly evident as I reflected and examined from afar, is the way that the females of the species, they have a very special superpower, which is they can tell the difference between people who are putting on a really good act.
Yes.
And
yes.
that they don't care. It's all good. Versus those for whom they really don't care. And it is all good. Yeah. And that's annoying in the early stages, but also, a really interesting means to receive feedback on how does my physiology impact on the physiology of others? How does my central nervous system communicate to the central nervous system of others?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of vibes and vibing and how much of our communication is sub-linguistic, nonverbal is... I used to be much more head-oriented and intellectually driven just a few years ago, and now sinking more and more into the value of being capital B to be a complete asshole. It's I'm really impressed by that mode of existence, and incidentally, I feel like learning to be more aligned with that element of being a person is also what opens you up to being more efficient intellectually and more efficient when actually employing the linguistic capacities that we do have, and that can be very useful.
No, most definitely, because I think if we are continuously trying to suppress activity in core circuitry that's producing sensations of anger or fear or disgust or even joy, anything that doesn't feel like it's appropriate or safe right now, well, then we have to deploy additional circuitry in order to suppress that, filter that out. And that can often feel really unpleasant. The inhibitory circuitry is so well characterized as generating anxiety, which of course is fairly unbearable. And that's why we deploy so many defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms against that, be that distraction and scrolling, or just making sure that we're busy 24/7 and that we never stop. I'm talking about watching YouTube videos whilst we brush our teeth, etc. Equally, it's reframing, which is hugely energy intensive. Producing a different interpretation, really squeezing that out with our cognitive areas of the brain, which again is massive use of energy. Of course, physical tension, which is something that very reliably blocks interoception, that transmission of the internal state of the body to the prefrontal cortex, where we can become conscious of it. It's very, very reliable at blocking that. So no matter what, if we wish to dodge or avoid the inconvenience or the potential conflict that comes with the expression of these core impulses, either we're going to feel awful or we're going to add that additional layer of numbing and holding back through major energy intensive processes. And it's hardly a shock to hear that, if you're deploying 3 times the circuitry you need to deploy, you're not going to have much resources left over for creativity and problem solving and thinking in a more efficient, expansive and productive manner.
For people who haven't listened to the previous episodes I've done with you, Marek is a functional nutritional therapist, my therapist, in fact, and is very well versed in neurobiology and physiology, as you probably already hear. But so I'm thinking maybe if we jump back to the article. You've touched on it already, but let me ask it again. So generally, what role does physiology play in introspective success, and what problems might arise when ignored? And let's start there.
So we'll keep it simple to begin with. Plays a big role. And there is a very well-established pattern that I've seen over many years, which is that people who do not attend to the physiological obstacles won't get very far. Equally, people that don't tend to the psychological obstacles won't get very far. And I think one of the biggest paradigm issues that we have is how most people, when they're not feeling right or they're suffering with these metabolic challenges, they're looking for the cause. They're looking for the reason. What's the trigger of all of these issues? And it's all singular. And that's an overspill from the inbuilt focus points of Western medicine over the last 80 years, which is that there's one pill for every ill. And
right.
As we've seen with the spectacular decline in human health that comes whenever Western medicine is applied, this is a system that just doesn't work for maintaining health. Fine, if you get hit by a car, very useful for that. But yeah, the emergency medicine model is highly problematic. Right. So in that sense, we're always looking for, well, what are the contributing factors here? And of course, you could go further to identify that as what's currently wrong, but also what can we change to actually improve the situation? What's the rate limiting factors? But when it comes to this particular issue, yeah, it's so often the case that people decide, right, it's a stress thing. I need to get control of my stress. And they may well decide that, right, I'm going to journal. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to go and see a talking therapist, all of which have very powerful effects, or should I say, have potentially powerful effects. But when we look at the neurobiological mechanisms, how do these things work? And we can touch on that in more detail. But they are working through rewiring the brain, rewiring the connections so that after you've gone through that process, the day after and the day after that, and every day thereafter, when key circuits are activated by everyday life, rather than them activating a stress response because of a maladaptive association, well, you've updated that out-of-date association. Right. You have recategorized what this sensation means. And the reflexive structures of our brain act in a different way. One whereby they don't reflexively initiate a cascade of physiological events that we call the stress response, which is there in order to get more energy into the bloodstream so that we're better able to handle the expected challenge or the potential challenge in times of uncertainty. So suddenly, by rewiring these associations, not only are we able to feel these sensations more appropriately because they're not being reflexively inhibited, but also the energetic cost, that huge rediversion of resources away from energy-intensive areas of the brain like the prefrontal cortex that helps us with executive control and learning, planning, problem-solving, verbal recall, etc. Also plays a big role in mood. The resources that would have gone to detoxification, digestion, to cellular repair, all of those are redistributed into getting ready. So that's what we want to achieve. But how does that rewiring take place? That's where we have to have the experience of these sensations while nothing bad goes on. Well, nothing bad happens while no tiger rips your arm off. And if you don't experience these things, then, yeah, these subcortical structures, they aren't going to be able to update their out-of-date wiring because they only do so through experience. And this is where, if you've got metabolic problems in areas of the brain, or metabolic problems that affect those areas of the brain that are so crucial for that transmission or the actual re-experiencing, the simulation that goes on in the corticothalamic loops or in the hippocampus that's so necessary to update these associative memories. If you've got any problems affecting those zones, well, it's not something we can expect to work in the same way. And frontline observations show us again and again and again, we don't get those responses until we attend to them.
Just to make sure I understood you here. So the associate rewiring your brain. The first thing that popped up there was that everything we do, because I feel like oftentimes there is an emphasis on X intervention changes your brain, and there's some new study, and then it forgoes almost everyone reading it that everything we do changes and rewires our brains all the time. But you saved it later when you were talking about changing the associations there, which I interpreted you to mean bad associations that create a stress response to triggers that aren't actually warranting a stress response. Let's say a thought that can't harm you, but the thought itself creates the same type of physical cascade that you would get if you were in fact getting your arm ripped off by a tiger. Did I read you right there?
You did.
What associations you were
the classic,
talking about?
Almost caricatured examples would be the smell of lukewarm blonde beer. That reminds me of amazing times on holiday as a 15-year-old, even today. There's nothing good about that smell. It's actually not even that pleasant. But that was what me and several other 15-year-olds were drinking in French Field on that particular occasion. And I have nothing but warm memories. So that's an association. It's not a problem. But it's not based on objective reality. There's nothing nice about it. But equally at the same time, what if somebody in a red jumper was to run up on you and hit you on the head with a baseball bat? A week later, you go around to meet someone's new child and they've got a red jumper on. Heart rate increases.
Right.
That newborn child is not a threat to you. But there is something about the red jumper that is associated with danger. And so, that is obviously a little bit, as I said, almost cartoonish in the way I've described it. But it is the principles that we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a great clarification. So I recently read a article on meditation. It was review of a long meditation system that I don't remember the name of, but he was saying that he was pushing in the review, okay, what's the point of meditation? What's the ultimate point of it, according to the author? And his answer was, it is to reduce technical debt, and I'll get to what that means in this context, to have a better life, whatever that means to you, to be able to have a good life on your terms. And so technical debt, as far as I understand it, is a concept borrowed from computer science and programming. And it essentially means that if you, let's say you're trying to create a program for a certain client. I'm actually a software developer myself these days. So let's say I have a new consultancy mission and I don't have much time to finish the product. I've been slacking off perhaps. And now I just got to get this program done in time. And so I take some shortcuts in how I create the product. And thus I create some technical debt, some problems that are going to need to be addressed later or that will accumulate when a new developer tries to build on top of what I've built. So it's something that works for the purpose of the moment, which is me not getting fired or yelled at. But over a long period of time, if the next person keeps doing that and then it just keeps accruing, we're going to have a big fucking problem, right? And I really like this concept when it's applied to emotional repression, broadly construed. So, I mean, the technical debt of overwhelming situations throughout our lives that can't be dealt with at the time T, and thus create all of these, in your lingo, faulty associations that are adaptive at some point, but becomes increasingly maladaptive and downright awful for much of our adult life if unattended to.
That definitely speaks to me because the one pattern that I think applies across society is that people are going to run into problems if they fall behind with that ongoing updating process that updates any associations that are now out of date and maladaptive. And of course, it's impossible to have fully adaptive associations all the time. We are ultimately approximating, the meanings of most things, and provided that that's almost entirely adaptive, we're going to do very well. But yeah, what if we do fall behind in this constant updating process? And that's something that in theory should happen most nights during REM sleep, which is a very fascinating area of study purely because of the complexity involved in how the brain is doing what it's doing, but also the implications that has on how we feel in the coming days and our emotional health thereafter. And so, it very much centers there on taking the unprocessed, untimelined sensations and impulses, fractions of memories that felt important at the time but were not allocated meaning. There was no capacity to allocate the meaning. There was no capacity to go through reflection during the event itself. And thus, we have that fallback capacity to update these meanings and give everything the right categorization through dreaming. But should sleep be disturbed, should there be physical tension that now becomes habitual and ongoing, blocking those sensations from getting where they need to be? Or should there be overactive stress response that sees us wake up every time we are subject to anything that is even somewhat arousing? Well, then that's not going to do the job that we would want it to do. And suddenly we're likely to start falling behind with the rate at which we're updating associations and essentially maintaining that adaptive relationship with the world around us compared to the rate at which we're accumulating. So this is talking about neuroplasticity. And so if we fall behind because of disruptions to healthy sleep patterns, or because of accumulated physical tension that means that can't work so effectively, or because of an overactive stress response that means we get kicked out of sleep every time we got close to the good stuff, or because the stressor involved was so pronounced in how challenging it was. So, of course, we're talking about trauma there. Or alternatively, because we're missing the conditions that we need in our brains to promote that neuroplasticity. So inflammation tends to be one of the major problems there, both through a disturbance induced by the inflammatory cytokines themselves, but also through downstream effects on serotonin availability. That can have devastating effects on neuroplasticity. In any case, I wanted to just paint that picture because there's a multitude of ways that we can fall behind in staying up to date on this accumulated mass of maladaptive associations. And it hasn't escaped my attention that you look at every single traditional healing approach from indigenous cultures going back thousands of years, all of them have rituals whereby there is periodical discharging of things that need that attention. And it will almost always involve some sort of physical process, as well as the emotional introspection. We don't have that.
So essentially, you're
culture.
talking about masturbatory practices of different kinds.
I'm talking more about the communal rituals, which typically don't necessarily involve too much masturbation, according to my knowledge. But ones whereby traditionally and somewhat poetically often linked into the lunar cycle, but it's a periodical. Normalized time at which people can get discharge of things that are building in them. Because as soon as people accumulate that critical mass of maladaptive associations, well, now they're crossing that Rubicon into problems. And without intervention, they're not coming back. Because now what we're expecting to see is that so much non-threatening stimuli is going to elicit a threatening response. That is to say, a stress response. That is to say, a huge diversion of your energy resources away from healing processes, repair, but also neuroplasticity. It's also going to have very predictable consequences on that REM sleep that I speak of. And suddenly you cannot expect to maintain the metabolic conditions required for healthy neuroplasticity. At which point you are going to have an even harder journey to continually adapt your neural wiring to the environment around you. And thus you start accumulating these maladaptive associations at an even faster rate. So that's where interventions like the meditation, the somatic work, the breath work, the psychedelics, that's where they have such a powerful role to play. However, hopefully what is already becoming clear, and what is clear in the article that you referred to, is that it would be naive to simply pull that lever and expect that is an effective therapeutic approach, and therefore that will solve my problems, because actually we're seeing this self-perpetuating cycle wherein the messages that are coming into the control centers in the brain, for which we could identify the hypothalamus or the amygdala as those central features. But those messages coming in are obligating a stress response, which is not only having that devastating effect on available resources, but it's also opening up the gut lining in search of more sugars and salts, and that's allowing in endotoxins, these little fragments of dead bacteria, which, while they can't actually cause an infection, they are simply fragments of bacteria. They've got tons more DNA of bacterial origin on display, and they elicit a very potent immune system response, one that not only now ratchets up those inflammatory cytokines with inevitable effects, but also can see us pumping out lots of nitric oxide, which in the right places, in the right amounts, is all good, but in these scenarios has a very likely tendency to compete with oxygen at the mitochondria. So now these individuals have even less energy production. And not only that, because of the inflammation, more energy is being stolen. Activated immune cells are very, very thirsty. Now, what's the stress response all about? It's all about getting energy into circulation so that you're better equipped to meet the upcoming challenge. The lower baseline energy you've got, the more of a stress response you need just for everyday life. So that's where not only does the stress response have this huge impact on what's going on in the body and driving a lot of these issues that we see, a lot of the symptoms, it's driving them directly, but it's also exaggerating the stress response. Now, those physiological issues, of course, they're going to have very pronounced effects on what we see in the central nervous system. If you have low energy status, it's very well characterized what happens to processes at the prefrontal cortex, or in vagus nerve activity, or in regulation of glutamate activity. You are less able to regulate, to self-regulate, meaning that the very process that we're speaking of to go through that updating of maladaptive associations, which is to experience the sensation whilst nothing bad happens. The concept is very, very simple. But in humans, there is that cruel catch-22, which is the reason we want to update those maladaptive associations is because they cause unnecessary stress response. But in order to update them, we simply need to experience them while nothing bad happens. But as soon as we get close to doing them, the same associations are likely to activate that stress response and kick us out of that introspective state that we needed to stick with. And that's where most people will get nowhere. Unless, of course, we give them a fair chance by understanding where are the obstacles in their case, and what specific step in each pathway is causing them, and then tending to that.
So you mentioned the concept in the beginning, I think, and I've heard it before coming from you, the rate limiting factor.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
Which I think is, I think it's extremely useful. And the basic idea when used in your practice, instead of asking, as I'm sure many people, as I'm sure you're used to hearing from from a lot of people, oh, Marek, what's the healthiest thing for X? What's the best supplement for stress? What's the best for this? And where you very rightly say, well, fuck that. That's not the question. The question is, what is the next useful thing that we can attend to that is going to have the most bang for your buck? And so I've worked with you for a long time, and I remember quite early in our journey, you have this idea of, if you're coming in, as I did, extremely overburdened physically, emotionally as well, but basically the car that is my body is coming in with one tire and the gas pipe hanging on the floor and no motor oil, whatever. It doesn't make much sense to talk about how I need to use the signal when I'm driving, or the best way to hold my hands on the steering wheel, or whatever, or what radio to have, or what radio station to play. Right now, we just need to fix the fucking car, right? And so I think that's very useful. And what you said to me was, at a certain point where we had gotten me out of the so-called emergency state physiologically, and where I now had a little more resources, you mentioned that now the rate limiting factor is actually going to be these maladaptive associations and your emotional repression being extremely costly for you, trying to push all that down. And I denied this for a good many years, actually, unfortunately.
I recall.
And no, what is he talking about, man? I got that under control. Like, I'm never angry. I'm never sad. I don't have any sadness or anger. And you try to gently nudge me towards, well, yeah, but if you're human, you should feel anger and sadness. Maybe that's the problem. And so I can resonate very much with that concept. And but so you've mentioned several things there that are applicable to the general person, because I mean, this self-perpetuating bad cycle you're talking about, you need to reach a certain level of badness physiologically and emotionally before you are in that emergency state where introspection won't be that useful. until you've done interventions, right? So would you say the average, or rather, how would you categorize the average Joe in terms of resources for introspection? Is this something that only applies to the very damaged, stressed out individuals, or is normal everyday stress enough to warrant looking at the physiological side?
So normal everyday stress is absolutely enough. The advantage, though, that your average man in the street who is overburdened and overstressed, on average, experiences emotional repression and discomfort with a number of emotional states, likely due to a number of factors, be that the positive parenting movement in the 80s, which declared that every single child is exceptional and must never feel anything other than wonderful things all of the time, leaving a generation of human beings pathologically intolerant of even mild discomfort. And added to the fact then that we do have, the circumstances with social media and ultimately, serving up dopamine hits whenever you wish, wherever you wish, provided you've got charge. And intermingled with that, the whole comparison thing, which of course is, so intertwined with competitiveness and ensuring that you are like everybody else, but better. And that's going to be very draining for a lot of people. There's a huge output of energy that's going to be used up, both in the typical schedules that we subject ourselves to, and equally the lack of sleep that we get and the poor quality food that we're eating. The caffeine diet is not really one that's going to have positive long-term effects, but hey, what would I know about that? In any case, the interesting thing, though, is that given the opportunity, somebody who is burdened but metabolically regulated can bring themselves back into a balance with relative ease. Or that is to say, we'd expect them to respond the way that they should, the way that the literature would indicate they are likely to respond to certain interventions, because they are actually very representative of these study populations that again and again and again end up being used in the literature, which it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't use the literature, because it does only refer to your average man in the street who is metabolically regulated but not in great health and maybe a bit too stressed and maybe a bit underslept, but overall is okay-ish. But nonetheless, those are individuals for whom, we can expect them to benefit from the meditation or other introspective processes without first having to sort out a whole load of metabolic challenges. They don't need that scaffolding to get going. Whereas if there is self-perpetuating cycles, such as the one I've mentioned where stress response gets locked into the on position and the gut lining is therefore continually opened up in search of nutrients, and therefore the swarm of bacterial products enter the bloodstream around the clock, and therefore there's the inflammation, there's the mitochondrial effects. And in that scenario, you've got no resources. You're just not likely to be able to engage in any sort of self-regulation, given how energy intensive that process is, leveraged by that prefrontal cortex, the single most energy intensive area of the entire body. And equally, there's often adrenal problems that go with that, both in regard to those mitochondrial effects limiting cortisol production and cortisol sensitivity dropping every time those bacterial products end up in the bloodstream. Thus, you end up with less ability to produce an optimal amount and less ability for it to do its job once it is indeed produced. And cortisol is a huge player in regulating the stress response. And it's really worthwhile just taking a diversion to emphasize how calling cortisol the stress hormone is so misleading, because it is the hormone that is released during stress to help us cope with stress and to turn off the stress response when it's no longer needed. So if anything impairs cortisol production or its signaling, then we can expect a severe disadvantage when it comes to dealing with anything that is stressful. And, contrary to the Instagram idea of meditating to find instant bliss, meditation is all about that excavation and confrontation, and that's stressful. Meditation is always stressful. It's the downstream effects of the rewiring that goes on that allows us to move closer to what we might call that bliss state. And often there are pockets of bliss that arise during it, but in the main, it's stressful. Trying to do that without the energy you need means you need even more of a stress response than somebody who started with a decent level of energy. Equally, if you're trying to do that without your body's most powerful means of control of that stress response, which is negative feedback from cortisol, it's not going to happen. And it doesn't.
It's not going to happen and doesn't, as in you're not going to be able to usefully rewire anything by
Pretty
meditating.
Much. Yeah, exactly. And I should probably just be more specific. It's not a black and white thing. It's not going to happen to our satisfaction. There are still benefits, and anyone is still likely to have that opportunity to come down a notch. Ultimately, we should still recognize that sitting quietly for half an hour is still probably better than watching Love Island for our well-being and health. Boom, got that in there.
Nice, so, impressive.
Yeah, that was impressive, I thought. So there is still some benefits, but when you look at what meditation can do, or any introspective process, what it can do, and the immense life-changing capabilities that comes with that, versus the idea of, I felt a little bit calmer and I didn't use up quite as much energy for having that half an hour out. It's a pretty miserable return. And that's where people either A, start taking videos of themselves meditating and stick them on the social media, pretending that sitting in the lotus position is somehow making them a superior being, or they do what most people are doing, which is to say, no, I try meditation. Doesn't do shit for me.
Yeah, it's bunk. Yeah.
No, that's not what I need.
Yeah, no, this is something that I've discussed with other guests on this podcast. There are different models of mind circulating in these type of introspective circles, and within meditation, it's often they often speak about the monkey mind, or the idea that your mind is somewhat chaotic as a default, almost, that you need to sit and analogous to exercising your muscles regularly to strengthen them, you have to exercise your mind to make it more focused and less crazy. And I know Sam Harris talks about how in his case, the voice in the head is basically analogous to being captured by being held hostage by the most boring person on earth and being forced to have the same conversation over and over again, which I think is fairly indicative of this model and funny. But so my model of the mind doesn't involve that. It's more leaned towards the idea that, if we use the technical debt metaphor again, having a seemingly chaotic mind is the result of a lot of technical debt, and emptying out this well of repressed emotion and physical tension will lead to direct correlations in the amount of thoughts and boring conversations you have with yourself. Oftentimes, whole chunks of personality can fall off. I'm speaking of my own experience now. And I found that traditional meditation wasn't useful at all for me until I had done a fair amount of developing emotional fluidity and emptying out that debt, because now it's like night and day. How meditation looks now for me is quite enjoyable, and I don't have to fight my way into a concentrated state or a pleasant open awareness type state. Whereas before, I could really resonate with the whole monkey mind metaphor. And so it's an interesting question whether many, if not most people, would benefit more from dealing with some emotional somatic type practices before going into the clearly meditation, the formal type of meditation sittings.
That's a pattern that I have observed again and again and again, in that meditation in the formal definition of it, sitting with our thoughts and inner stirrings. Yeah, I very rarely see that work for people who have any sort of metabolic challenges, or at least it doesn't until they are resolved. And that can be really difficult for individuals when they can't get progress with their physical health until this hyper-mega-active stress response is calmed. Because anything that we do to increase the production of energy and availability of resource, well, it's instantly deployed to that ongoing preparation for the conflict. So normally we can substantially improve someone's ability to benefit from those things through, that first round of metabolic support. But there are individuals for whom, there is such a hyperactive stress response, such hypervigilance that, they need to do some rewiring before they can even reach that platform of stability on a physiological basis. And so that's where, the somatic work is so valuable, because whereas we've discussed the role of meditation and paid very brief lip service to the role of the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, and areas that can be compromised in states of metabolic challenge. Well, why would we want to deploy an approach that depends on them functioning in a somewhat functional manner? So this is where the somatic approaches, the body-mind approaches, can be so valuable, because they're not leaning on that conscious sense-making process in the same way. So they're hugely using the body, and be that physical movement, be that massage and physical manipulation of tight zones, be that vocalizations, be that the physical presence of a trusted therapist, an other who is on tiger watch on our behalf, so that our vagus nerve system does not need to do so, but equally can provide that active reassurance throughout. So we've got the self-regulation sorted, because now that regulation is being provided externally. But B, we're also creating a very, very contrasting environment to default, wherein this sensation, be that anger or disgust or fear or sadness, the one that has been so heavily associated with some sort of danger, Well, we're very much changing the environment in which it's emerging to essentially force the reflexive zones of our body to recognize the truth that this is a different situation to the one we're used to. And thus, it's important to suspend the reflexive protective approach that evolution has rewarded, to just hold that back, to give us just that opportunity to get beyond the veil and to feel it while nothing bad happens. And so, yeah, taking on a triumphant posture in a scenario that links to prior defeat, vocalizations that clearly have an entirely opposite meaning for us and thus cannot be part of this dangerous environment that the amygdala is sensing or predicting, because it's going to do that given the slightest opportunity when it works independently. It's the one part of the brain we don't want to be making decisions independently unless there is an actual threat, in which case it's super valuable. In that regard, it's using multiple physiological cues, which are inevitably customized to each individual, to allow for a different environment to receive the exact same stimuli. But because of those additional signals that are providing totally different context, we don't see the same hijack occur. We don't get kicked out of that introspective space. We can stay with it just long enough in order to do that real basic event of experiencing something, experiencing the impulse and the sensation whilst nothing bad happens, and thus initiating that rewiring process that we want. And so it's obviously worthwhile touching on breath work as well, because very similar outcome, but different approach. This is all about, very specific breathing patterns. One that is going to modify the way the chest, the diaphragm, the abdomen move. And that's really interesting. And if you've heard some of the podcasts from the Huberman Lab and some of the interesting material that is discussed within, very much so. There's very clear evidence of the role that tension in the diaphragm plays as a contextual cue for these control centers in the brain, in that if we are holding the diaphragm in an attempt to not be detected, well, clearly part of the body is trying to avoid a predator or a potential predator. So that's important context. So just changing that can be quite powerful, although the single biggest victories with breathwork come through the modulation of carbon dioxide and oxygen in a way that switches off the default mode network, or at least turns it down. So the default mode network is this network of brain areas that together is continually maintaining our preferences, maintaining the rules, allowing us to remain consistent, and therefore plays a really important role in our functioning as a human being in a complex society. But it also can be the area that's constantly identifying what is safe or non-safe, etc., on behalf of the amygdala. In other words, it's placing stickers on things as they enter. Right. So, that's where, if you switch that off, and breathwork is fantastic for that. So too EMDR, the eye movement desensitization. Oh, yeah. So suddenly you remove this unhelpful whispering into the ear of the amygdala that's prompting it to respond in an inappropriate manner. Suddenly, that hijack that was constantly happening, that was kicking us out of that introspective state and into an external threat perception mode, well, that's no longer happening. And so this is where people find that, whoa, something strange is happening. I'm noticing the trembling, the vibrating, the buzzing. This is getting intense. Even when it's pleasurable, it's still uncomfortably intense. And then comes the release. And those are very powerful mechanisms. And speaking of the default mode network, that is the primary mechanism through which things like psilocybin work. And so this is where we do have these powerful tools to break the cycle that would otherwise give people insurmountable obstacles in undertaking that rewiring process, which they need to do in order to stop responding with a stress response to non-stressful stimuli, which they're going to need to do in order to reclaim their own resources, which they're going to need to do if they want to resolve their health challenges.
Yes. I mean, I find it interesting to think about the relationship between mind and body, if it makes sense to divide them up that way. Because you have this saying, you can't meditate while running from a tiger, which in practical terms and in 99.9% of times I would probably agree with, is a very useful heuristic. And yet it's probably not universally true if you look at not only the claims of certain meditative or spiritual quote-unquote traditions, but if it can be borne out if you look at available videos of, I think, Tibetan monks or monks in Nepal or something like that, lighting themselves on fire whilst meditating in protest, and then sitting there quietly until dead without moving a muscle, which evolutionarily is not the best idea. And clearly...
No, and therefore I think we can update that particular phrase for any pedants out there to, you can't meditate whilst running from a tiger unless you deploy decades of practice to overcome
there
evolutionary blockages that would ensure that that's the case.
There we go. That's great. I like that. So I would like to put forth the a distinction also, I think, originating with Sam Harris, talking about the possible states of being in is essentially happy mind, happy body, happy mind, unhappy body, and vice versa. So you have 4 different states there. And that they are, to some extent, detachable from each other in that way. In the sense of there being a possibility to give someone cues at a practice and higher mind level, or putting in support at a physiological level, and both can be useful. And so I'm curious how you think about, for instance, in terms of doing the rewiring you're talking about. I often think about it in terms of, on the mind level, what you want to do is you want to bring repressed material up into loving awareness and basically experiencing it or embracing it, you could say, having no resistance to feeling it whatsoever, which could be called a type of love. And in my own case, I've noticed that we did a lot of physiological work, you and I, but the most bang from my buck has come from hundreds of hours in my case. And I think I'm an edge case because I had, you could call it some type of PTSD and panic disorder, and tons of repression in a way I don't think is common for the average person, perhaps. But a very big difference when I've emptied out that well in terms of how well I can function on low sleep, or even if I'm feeling horribly bad in my physiology and my body, I have so much uncomfortable sensation. The ability to step back and be equanimous with whatever is arising in my phenomenology is night and day. And still, my HRV values are not crazy better than they were before. So, I mean, what do you make of that type of mental instruction or technique being useful? Yeah, this unhappy mind, happy body kind of thing.
Yeah, it can be very important, and obviously, at least from from a distance shares a lot of principles with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That is to say, to change the way that we interpret the world so that, yes, we are in a happier place, and consequently, the happier we are, the less aroused we are in terms of, those defensive responses. And our physiology changes with it. And there's no doubt that as much as we've spoken a lot about the physiology affecting the psychology, the opposite is also true. So, that is a very powerful way to go about things. And it's something that I think a lot of us will do instinctively. It certainly ties into the mind over matter approach, which is rewarded in the society that we live in. We continually hear all those studies of the 5-year-olds were asked to stay in front of a cookie for 3 minutes and see if they could avoid eating it. And those that have managed to avoid it were earning $13,000 a year more by the time they were 30. I don't know the exact figures, but I don't remember hearing that repeatedly. But what I want to know is how many of them were having heart attacks at 50. So, it's great for being a productive member of society if we can learn to change our state. The problem being, where do we go from supporting our physiology and stepping out of situations that would otherwise be unnecessarily stressful to simply suppressing emotions? That's the difficult balance to be struck within those realms. And that's why it's not a case of these things are good or bad. They can be very, very useful. But it is very interesting when we talk about the classic profile of somebody who develops complex and chronic physical issues, ill health. In almost all cases, not all, but almost all, what we see is a overdeveloped talent for reframing and overcoming internal conditions that would be otherwise uncomfortable, which generally gives them the ability to take on stress that others would balk at. They can get stuff done when others are tapping out. And it's something that society rewards them for. And of course, they're going to feel immense pride at their ability to stay in control of their emotions when others are flapping, to not break when others have called in sick and been signed off, etc. But here is the problem. That is a very, very useful tool at our disposal, provided it's used as such. Obviously, it's really helpful to remain stable during a public presentation, wherein my objective is to communicate the ideas that I think will serve my audience. If I was to become unduly angry
on this podcast,
we're millimeters away.
Why is Chris so annoying?
But if I was to get unnecessarily angry at the fact that, despite me checking in to ensure that the presentation has been received and applied and is rendering okay and been assured repeatedly by the tech engineers who then go and produce the wrong presentation, that's not going to help. So that's a circumstance where it's actually very appropriate to be able to lean on that reframing and repress the impulses to leave the stage and strangle the engineer in question. That's not going to help. So be it if there is something that makes me feel sad, me crying whilst I'm talking about the various roles of NADPH in steroidogenesis, that's not going to help. So this is a really useful tool, but what if that becomes our default means of going about life? Well, that's where we will probably end up being successful
Yeah.
in society's terms until we're not. Because this is a setup that calls for the adrenal gland to do overtime. They have to maintain higher levels of cortisol outputs and higher levels of cortisol activity to compensate for that continual stress response, which is opening up the gut lining and inducing those inflammatory cascades that need to be controlled.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they are, and as long as they're controlled enough that it doesn't affect energy production, we're going to be okay, provided we've also got the energy production to work overtime in the prefrontal cortex. So we can continually reframe, continually suppress, turn off the lights of those zones that are causing instability in our state. So that's all good and well, but the problem is when your well-being and ongoing functionality and your general ability to maintain what you're doing and keep doing those 70 hours of work each week. Well, what happens when you get a hit on your spine whilst living in a moldy flat, or you have a viral infection, or you have a particularly acute stressor, be that the loss of a loved one, the breakup of a relationship, or perhaps no sleep for several days because of back pain, or because you're only getting 2 hours of sleep a night whilst you're working on the big case or end of quarter reports, whatever it is. At that stage, if anything comes along and even just temporarily affects your ability to produce cortisol, viral infections are pretty good at disrupting that. Or anything that impacts on energy availability. And any major inflammatory event will do that. Steal energy through these hugely thirsty activated immune cells. Or, anything that temporarily increases the activity of the amygdala, reduces it at the prefrontal cortex. Well, to use the medical term, you're now screwed. Because suddenly that overtime that you needed is not available. You cannot suppress all of these underlying, those underlying sensory stimuli that's coming in and activating the stress response. You can't hold that down anymore. And thus you've suddenly got that unrestricted stress response, the opening of the gut lining, the inflammatory events that come with it, and with it the downregulation of cortisol. So even if you now clear the viral infection 3 days later, you're now in a different setup, one whereby you can't expect that cortisol to have the same activity that it was otherwise going to. And thus it's not going to hold back the inflammation in the same way. It's not going to protect your energy production in the same way or maintain optimal serotonin signaling in the brain, for which cortisol plays a big role. So suddenly, what you needed to continually work overtime in an exquisite and flawless manner, can't do that anymore. And that's where a lot of people find themselves, and they'll look at, well, it doesn't make any sense because I recovered from the virus, but look what's gone on. Or I actually changed job. I quit for a year in order to rest and recover. And if anything, I felt worse because they had more time to sit with how they felt, less distractions to remove their focus from that. So this is where, we'll often see individuals who can skillfully use that self-regulation, top-down approach, reframing, etc. If they can skillfully use that, they're going to be more successful in the society in which we live, which rewards the ability to deploy that response. But if they go from using that as a tool to making that the way they attack life, which of course is substantially more common, then the question is not, are they going to run into mysterious, undefined health problems, which often simply center on them just feeling a bit shit all the time. Instead, it's a case of when is that going to happen?
I would take all those points, and I would also separate these cognitive reframing approaches you're talking about here from a more fundamental insight, I would say, into phenomenology of being a person. The idea in certain Buddhist context would be called happiness independent of conditions, that is less contingent of actually engaging with the contents of consciousness, and in this case, the explicit thoughts and language-driven content, and more with having insight into the prior condition of consciousness. One can identify with that space where the content arises in, rather than any specific content, and thus, in some important sense, equalize any experience. But so I wanna move on, and I wanna get specific and general at the same time. Specific in the sense of, and I'm sure you're going to hate this, but specific in the sense of, okay, most people listening to this are probably not in the emergency state of not being able to benefit from introspection at all. If they are, I would strongly recommend them to come to you. Go to marekdoyle.com and sign up to consult with you, because it's been invaluable in my own case.
Glad to hear it.
Yes, and I think I have 3 or 4 other people that has gone to you now on my recommendation and felt the same way. So quite a pool of evidence building up here. But if they're not, and they want to have some kind of advice on how can they shore up their physiology, or what can one do here as an everyday person to make sure that one's introspective efforts are physiologically supported in a way that might make it more valuable or worth their while?
So it is easier to speak generally, and that's mainly because the way I go about things is very much personalized nutrition. So therefore the specifics will vary from one person to the next, but let's touch on the general, and then I'll provide some specific examples. So if I'm going to see somebody for the first time, and regardless of whether they report challenges with meditating, or simply we want to get them out of that emergency state, obviously my approach is going to be exactly the same regardless. And that will always focus on the questions as to their resources. How much resources do they have? And what I mean by that is something that can ultimately be broken down into an equation. How much energy are they producing at the mitochondria? How well is that energy availability being communicated? So that's insulin, thyroid signaling, etc. Minus how much is being stolen by the stress response, how much is being stolen by the inflammatory response. The net sum of those 4 factors, that's where we're looking at in terms of how much resources does somebody have. And if you're measuring your heart rate variability, you're measuring the behavior of your vagus nerve, which is exquisitely sensitive to those 4 areas. So whilst there will always be some people whose heartbeat is producing extra compensatory beats due to exceptionally low energy, and they're the people that feel awful but have wonderfully high heart rate variability, other than those minority of people, you can get a really good idea of where you're really at by measuring your heart rate variability. And there's a number of different means and metrics you can actually extract from that. But the most common one is the RMSSD, the root mean squared of the successive differences. And as a broad guideline, if it's 35 and below, that's going to be a fight and flight, to use a medical term.
You're dead.
Yeah. Not yet.
Yeah.
Just increasing the speed at which you're moving that way. And so this is a interesting state because you'll only tend to see two scenarios. One where somebody is in that inhibitory state and they are truly feeling it. They're going through it and they feel miserable all the time, partially because their physiology is so spiked, but also because of the horrendous sleep that comes with that. And they are, in a bad place. Then, of course, you have possibly the single most interesting specimens, whereby they are outright in this fight and flight zone, but they are deploying that overtime in that reframing zones of the prefrontal cortex. They're hugely physically tense, which leaves them a little bit flat emotionally. They don't laugh much.
No.
They'll put on the fake smiles that allow them to conduct business and be successful. And
they don't bend at the elbows or knees. That kind of person, yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Of course, you're coining a vision of people that look like they're moving like crash test dummies. The tension is often quite subtle, but still hugely important. So sometimes you will see the shoulders up by their ears, but often it could be embedded so heavily in the diaphragm, in the hip flexors, in the intestines, which is a very interesting zone because of the impact that has on the gut lining and what crosses it, and therefore systemic inflammation. It's powerful and it's very, very common. And biggest issue there is that we don't have many nerves in guts, or at least not many nerves that transmit pain in the usual way. So most people will never feel that until they have this spectacular and powerful release, normally quite loud with the gurgling that comes with it. And then they feel, whoa, what a difference. But of course, until that point, what's normal for them is normal for them. But I digress. These individuals will often not be feeling those core sensations. And they're extremely inhibited, but not necessarily in touch with the anxiety that comes with that due to that overtime at the prefrontal cortex and its reframing and its inhibitory activity, and especially due to that physical tension that blocks the transmission of those inner signals, the signals that convey the inner conditions. So they're the individuals that say, no, I'm categorically not stressed. And I said, well, let's look at this adrenal stress profile. Look at those results. Let's look at some of these metabolites on the organic acids test that show, the signs we expect with massive adrenaline release. Let's look at your heart rate variability, which is, absolutely on the floor.
What kind of values are you talking about there? Just for me, who's an HRV nerd.
So we're talking in the 20s or sometimes even in the teens.
Oh shit. Okay.
So and you'll have these scenarios where, as you may well know, and other HRV nerds out there, it's really, really difficult to induce teens. I normally find myself at the end of 90 minutes of football, if I'm
when you're
applying
spent,
myself, truly spent, I'll drop down into the 20s, and that's appropriate at that point. I'm in full recovery mode. I have got very little resources. And the key thing is how quickly does that recover, but that's another discussion for another day. But it's very difficult to drop down that low without that hugely overwhelming. But these are almost always individuals that have very successful careers. because they have an unusual capacity to suppress all of that signaling. So the key thing being that if you have this physical tension, that's so interesting in how it affects an area of the brain called the insula, which acts as a relay station to convey the signals that indicate our inner states. And that includes the temperature, that includes pressure and various other parameters, as well as what we're talking about here, the sensations and the impulses that we associate with emotions. So this is where this relay station can be inhibited from passing on those messages into the corticothalamic loops, the areas needed to produce the experience that we're after. So that means they do not become conscious of a lot of these things, but their amygdala is not subject to the same limitations. So their amygdala is still getting all of those signals. It's still rearranging the physiology. It's still preparing for the threats that it is perceiving are upcoming. So yeah, massive burden. And these are individuals that often have really good energy metabolism. And they sustain it for years. But also, if you never leave fight or flight, and you are very effectively numbed to those core sensations and impulses, then everything you experience is, it's all a little bit flat. You're never super happy, but you're never super sad. These are very balanced and level individuals, if a little bit flat. And that's flat to say in actual emotionality, not in terms of activity. They are go, 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 go individuals. They are always doing and succeeding and producing. But, there will also be the ones that might say, no, that's a load of shit. I'm not stressed. I understand why other people are, and I understand why other people need to take care of it. But trust me, I can do a 16-hour day of ridiculously intensive thing, and I don't feel a thing. What they mean to say is I was already in fight or flight before that 16-hour shift.
Right. Yeah.
I never leave fight or flight, so there is no contrast for me. That's how I hear it.
Yeah, right. So, okay, but you said 35 and below in HRV terms was indicative of fight or flight. What would be the range where you would think the individual is okay, not fully metabolically dysregulated, and perhaps capable of getting good results from introspection without having to do major physiological interventions first?
Well, even if somebody is in the 20s and 30s, if we take significant compensatory steps across their metabolism, we'll often see them stacking up at 30-something, and they just don't cross out of that until they do the introspective rewiring steps, for want of a better word. So often, they'll get to the top of that zone, and then they just get locked in at the top. They're not moving out of that zone no matter what they do physically, until, of course, there's that successful shift. But even in those scenarios, it is still very much the case that we've compensated, but you can never fully compensate for something the body is so hell-bent on doing, which is getting ready for a life-threatening incident. It's not going to change that because we provided some valerian root. And this is where, that's where the combination of the physiological compensation, the increased availability of resources, that can be really helpful, but won't see them leave this zone fully. They're stuck on the edge. They're still in that territory. And that's where, again and again and again, the one thing that will then move them out is to send out these individuals to undertake these processes, one that actually suits their physiological needs, but equally, what speaks to them as a person. And then often we'll see them transition. For others, they don't have the same restrictions and they'll immediately see a more pleasing improvement in those figures, which coincides with immediate improvements in their well-being. And they're individuals for whom there is still likely a benefit to taking these additional steps, but they will be able to carve out further treatment through good habits and engaging in some of these processes, the journaling, the meditation, anything that's introspective. They have more resources to be able to invest in activity of the prefrontal cortex, which is so crucial for that self-regulation and just holding down a excessive stress response, one that hijacks the processes we're talking of. So, it's difficult to make generalizations, but hey, we've just done it. But I hope that just gives a glimpse of some of the patterns that we're seeing. And yes, these patterns do occur repeatedly, but they're not universal. So it is difficult to create a flow chart per se that's based on the number you get back from your aura ring. But that's the general viewpoint that I think has immense value. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I promised some specific examples. So let's fulfill such a promise. And in that regard, the key thing, as I mentioned, is resources. So I want to sit with that individual in that initial consultation, and I will always be assessing the results from their organic acids test. That's a urinary test that measures 75 different markers across the body. So it's like 75 tests in one. But it gives us a really good glimpse into what's going on in neurotransmitters, in the microbiome, in detoxification capacity, digestive performance, but quite importantly, nutrient status across a range of vitamins and minerals, and possibly most importantly of all, the mitochondrial activity. So we get a lot of information from that, and there's no such thing as a perfect test, and no way is that going to tell us everything we need to know, but it gives us some immense clarity as a starting point. What is the case? What is not the case? And of course, often tells us what might be the case. But my job then is to marry that up against the case history and the picture that we're seeing in front of us, the daily patterns and the challenges that individual's facing. So it's often very clear where the major bulk of these challenges are coming from. And to go back to that equation I spoke of resources, are they suffering from blockages in mitochondrial energy production? Are they suffering from difficulties with energy signaling? Insulin sensitivity being an extremely common challenge. And a lot of people think that you're either insulin sensitive or you've got type 2 diabetes, and that's absolutely not the case. Lots of shades of grey. But that's, again, another story for another time. But then we're also looking at, inflammatory activity. We're looking at stress response. So, let's start with the first one there. Mitochondrial challenges. It's really unusual to see anybody with long-term challenges that doesn't have multiple blockages at some point of the mitochondria. So that might be a lack of B1, which slows down their ability to metabolize carbohydrates and extract energy efficiently from them. Or maybe there's an inflammatory event going on that is inhibiting that exact same step. B1 status is fine, but same problems with carbohydrate metabolism. Maybe there's a lack of carnitine and they can't use fatty acids efficiently for energy. Or maybe there's lack of CoQ10 and therefore this this conveyor belt within the mitochondria, the electron transport chain, the area tasked with taking these breakdown products from foods, the electrons, and then throwing them into the furnace so they can be combusted with oxygen. Well, if the capacity of that conveyor belt is impaired by lack of CoQ10 or due to excessive oxidative stress or other reasons, suddenly, you just cannot produce energy in the same way. You have to slow down the entire pathway. So this is where a lack of oxygen delivery to the cell is massive and also very, very common. If somebody has any chronic fatigue, more than 4 out of 5 will have that mitochondrial hypoxia marker show up on the organic acids test. That's something that you can get information from by looking at the aconitic acid levels. So,
classic.
That is a really, really brief overview, but hopefully conveys how I would look at the overall picture and how energy production issues might be playing a role for them. What's the downstream impact of that? But also identifying, well, what do we do to begin with? And so if somebody needs carnitine and CoQ10, then that's what we're going to give them. But we're not going to give that to somebody else who shows no need for them. They may well benefit from B1, or they may well benefit from factors that improve the capacity of the electron transport chain, but especially likely to benefit from magnesium if that's short. It's a big deal. Copper, huge deal. But ultimately, oxygen delivery. Is there any anemia? That would do it. Is there any hydrogen sulfide being produced in excessive in the gut? This is typically where people are getting intestinal gas that smells of rotten eggs, or finding that every time they eat broccoli and cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, that it really doesn't agree with them. And, those are individuals that, are likely producing enough hydrogen sulfide to compete with the oxygen. But the single most common reason that we would see that is because of undue stress response and the excessive opening up of the gut lining, the excessive movement of these endotoxins, the fragments of dead bacteria, and the excessive nitric oxide that's produced in response. And that will, of course, then compete with oxygen. So that's where dampening down the stress response suddenly becomes so pivotal to energy production. So maybe licorice roots, maybe practical steps to support blood sugar level management over the course of the day. It's a very potent but unnecessary source of stress in many people. Lifestyle changes, because ultimately if you are working 16 hours a day, you're getting nowhere. And equally, looking at, well, what may cause that stress, and is it sleep related? That's hugely stressful to have to go about your day without the sleep that you need. So this is where we're essentially working backwards from what we've confirmed to be an issue, and then what the data tells us is driving it, or at least likely to be driving it. And so that would be the starting point. But inflammation sometimes is some very clear inflammatory symptoms that show us that this is a big thing. This is dysregulated, and it's having a huge causative role in the picture we're seeing. So that's where we may well want to look at a combination of the triggers. Could that be environmental, pollen in the air, mold? Could that be food chemicals, oxalates, lectins, or specific allergens that are being consumed on a regular basis? Could that be the dysbiosis and the endotoxemia that I've touched on? So we'll look at that, but we'll also want to take a look at what are the means through which the body regulates the inflammation. So cortisol comes up yet again. That is this most powerful anti-inflammatory that we have at our disposal. But equally, we want to look at things like folate, things like glutathione, vitamin D, that have a very important immunoregulatory effect. So, yeah, we could go on, but I hope that that is a reasonable overview of specific steps that we can look at, and how there isn't a protocol for improved resources that's going to work well for everyone. Instead, we're looking at working backwards from points of certainty to other points of certainty that stand out as causative and tending to them. And the first round is all about removing those obvious obstacles. And they are all obvious at the end of that first appointment. And after that, we're going to see a whole load of patterns disappear. We'll probably see a whole load of patterns show resistance, and that's fine. That's what always happens. But now we've got a lot less to wade through. We've removed a lot of noise, and we can see very clearly where we're actually going to have to intervene. Because a lot of things we just don't need to intervene. You give the body a fair chance, it takes it. Other things, a bit more complex, and that's where that second phase then is focused towards.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say, and anyone listening right now probably agrees, that this is more complicated than people sometimes make it out to be when they're trying to just Google their way to the right solution instantly. But I want to clarify the plug I made for you in the middle there somewhere. Some of the people that I referred to you have not been in the emergency phase as I was, but just feeling a little bit off, wanting to improve sleep or workout results or energy. And so it's not only if you're feeling like life is essentially over that you go to Marek. So definitely check him out if any of this sounds interesting. But okay. So I want to tie a bow on this particular question that I gave you of recommendations with. I want the least nuanced answer here as possible, so you can't you can't pull.
You speaking to the right person.
But so is there any supplemental thing that would apply to almost anyone in terms of this one thing would probably be a useful thing for you?
You know what? There is, and it's magnesium. So it's one item for which we don't necessarily need to worry about interactions, as we might do with a whole load of medicinal herbs. And it's also one that is so commonly short, which tends to relate to the way food is processed, the pesticides, fungicides, herbicides that inhibit mineral movement, the underripe picking of various produce that's then gas ripened in transit, the storage and the cooking out of various minerals. So there's a whole load of factors that tie into it that leave our diets substantially shorter in magnesium now versus back in 1940 when those measurements were first conducted. But also, the more stressed we are, the quicker we will lose our magnesium. And it's fair to say that, yeah, we do take on more stress than was ever the case for prior generations. And so, yeah, magnesium is a really good starting point. I would recommend avoiding the very, very cheap and very ineffective magnesium oxide. So glycinate would be a very easy form. There's lots of other good forms that are chelated that are very well absorbed. That's not the only good one, but it's very well distributed. You're not going to struggle to find it. It does a great job. So, yeah, that could be a really nice starting point, especially doing so before bed. In actuality, the one item that has been most likely to have normal people, friends of friends, parents, etc., come back to me and say, wow, that really did what you said it was going to do.
Right.
So which, of course, I will issue a appropriately sarcastic remark. But yeah, the one thing that's likely to do that is magnesium. And I should probably point out that Magnesium is responsible for hundreds of different enzymes in the human body, but where you're most likely to notice them is in regards to energy metabolism, physical tension, and therefore muscular relaxation, hydration, and the distribution of fluids in the body. And on top of that, the role it plays on sensory gating. That is to say, to block out sensory stimulation that's just not relevant or important to us right now. That is conducted at every single neural junction at a receptors called NMDA receptors, and magnesium is really important for that to keep the gate closed when it should be closed.
Right.
Magnesium's in short supply, or if energy is in short supply, then the gate swings open and lots of irrelevant stimuli are now being transmitted to the control center. So they've got tons more to try and respond to. We should respond to the growling of large animals outside our cave. That's appropriate. We should not be getting a raised heart rate from the sound of the wind whistling through the trees. That's the difference when we have good sensory gating. Or, of course, in real life, it's probably going to come down to, can you pick out one conversation in a loud room where lots of other background noise is thrown around the place? Equally, do noises just cut right through you? If so, that's normally a sign of poor sensory gating. Stimulation hits you harder than it should, and you can't block out the irrelevant background stuff.
I had a plan to talk to you a lot about specific introspective techniques in our own journeys here, but I'm noticing that that'll have to be its own episode. And so I'm going to end on a note that I think is relevant here. In the Twitter corner where I'm active, and in the topic threads of introspection and emotional processing and these things, MDMA is a very commonly mentioned chemical agent that people tout as something very useful for emotional excavation and rewiring the brain in a nice way. And the science seems to be corroborating this more and more in the studies that are currently being done for PTSD and anxiety disorders and stuff like that. And so the neurotoxicity of MDMA is very debated, it seems like, but the general idea, if you go to websites like RollSafe or others that claim to be scientifically informed, the general idea is, you don't want to use more than 120 milligrams of MDMA per session. You want to wait at least 3 months between uses. So I'm just curious if what your reading of the science is, how it ties into the mechanism, and basically what your thoughts on that matter is.
So the science has become particularly interesting, especially in the last decade or so, whereby for the first time we've been seeing the results of randomized controlled trials with groups that receive psychotherapy versus those that receive MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And not only does that allow us to become more confident in the conclusions that, let's be honest, many of us would have already made from our real life observations, but it's also really interesting to see how emphatically helpful that's been in a unheard of improvements being achieved in these supposedly untreatable individuals. So, very, very interesting, not only in terms of the potential options that will mean for real human beings with real problems, but also the difficult political dances that are about to come up, wherein you have people like the US government who are so adamantly against any sort of empathogen one that may allow individuals to relate better to one another, improve community, and essentially become the exact opposite of the type of citizen that they want, which is to say, happy to just stick their head down, drink the Kool-Aid, get the job, which means they can get the mortgage, which means they can get the house, etc. But of course, the US government has also had such a long-winded PR campaign whereby military glory and providing peacekeeping in these places that they keep on bombing, they are now stuck because you've got the Veterans Association who, let's be honest, their interest is the health of the veterans, and there is nothing that has ever come close to the effect seen in these trials from Mithoff et al. 2011, Owen Parrott in the years following. There's a really compelling results there that just cannot possibly be ignored. They cannot be pushed back into that box. So that train has left the station. And they can try as hard as they want to put it back. And, of course, they'll employ the usual agents of mass communication, as we see in the mainstream media, all of these overhyped reports of MDMA deaths, which then when you read it, it turns out they never actually took MDMA. They took an entirely different substance, which they thought was MDMA.
Yeah, methamphetamine or something in that particular case, I think.
Well, there's multiple reports that I see over the years, or of course, they died following MDMA consumption. So we're using phrases that have a echo of many news reports over the last 2 years. Just because something happens following an infection doesn't mean it was caused by the infection. In the same way that if you took a substance 3 weeks ago and then got hit by a bus, it doesn't actually make it a death via the substance. But yes, so many times when you actually read the second to last paragraph, which is hidden away on page 37 of the newspaper, is actually not the substance was never involved. It was their intention, but they didn't get the substance. And whilst on any sane world that would be cause to legalize and regulate, somehow it's billed as the opposite. But I digress. The research is mainly useless, and yet it's overhyped. That's the reason why I wanted to provide that context, because I don't think it's accidental. I don't think that the scientists are as stupid as they pretend to be when it comes to the majority of MDMA research. I'm not ruling it out. I will always remember this classic scientific study by Japanese researchers, which was to identify the perfect chat-up line. And they spent a year researching this, and they decided that the perfect chat-up line was, "This time next year, let's be laughing together." Now, of course, the immediate question I want to ask is, how many of you guys have ever got laid? Because
hey, you should try MDMA and do some emotional introspection, perhaps.
It's there are times when you do have scientific teams that are hopelessly inequipped to actually even ask the right questions. So that's also possible, especially in the earlier stages. But yeah, we go back to research even as far back as the 80s, and they are providing monkeys and rats with MDMA, and they are finding very substantial neurotoxicity. There's a study in the 80s which found that MDMA usage in monkeys saw a 44% reduction in serotonin activity at lower doses, and 90% reduction at high doses. So, of course, this is really, really concerning. But of course, it's only concerning if you take the doses that they're giving them in that regard. So, yeah, these experiments, some of them were only providing as little as 2.5 milligrams per kilogram twice a day, 4 days running. Yeah, massive doses for 4 days running. Alternatively, some of them are given 10 milligrams per kilogram. So, yeah, to put that into context, that would be 15 times the recommended dosage, 4 days running. So, yeah, of course, we're starting to see problems that individuals who are at the same time using these substances saying, but hang on, why is nobody suffering? So that's the basis upon which most of these conclusions and these over-hyped headlines rest on, which is, yeah, if you take some item and you massively overdose it, and then you do so twice a day for 4 days running, maybe you're going to run into problems that you otherwise wouldn't run into. And so it does definitely speak to a reason to look at the dosage. And yeah, that clearly has a relevant role to play. But obviously, so too does set and setting. We know that, yeah, there has been studies on humans, which, yeah, for example, a meta-study which looked at all the imaging studies to see, you know, is there any change in the serotonergic system, and found that there was. But then when actually you look at it, they assessed the top 5 to 10% of all users, people who on average were consuming 7 times the amount of the average user. I believe the meta-study in question, the mean use was around about 1.5 pills per session of unidentified potency, taken every 3 weeks over a long period of time. Doing so with in a party environment, so therefore the default being other drugs, other alcohol. So, in other words, we don't know how much they're using, only that they're using loads. We know that they're likely dancing and raving, which is relevant given hypothermia is involved as a mechanism in increasing serotonergic toxicity of MDMA. And we know they're overly using this at a particularly frequent level. And yeah, undersleeping. These are hedonists. They are not psychonauts. And yeah, that's quite important, not only because of the actual event that we're trying to measure and the total lack of measurement involved, other than knowing that they're the heaviest users, but also because of what's likely to go with that. People who ignore governmental health advice typically don't tend to take much care of the rest of the picture that's involved with maintaining good health. So, yeah, it's an interesting one in the sense that all we know is they're taking big doses regularly in a party environment with other substances. So we can't really take too much from that. But meanwhile, yeah, other studies that look into that find that when you actually look at the doses in question, there's never been any concern shown in the evidence for standardized dosages, the type that are used in the responsible psychotherapeutic environment. So it is like anything. For example, yeah, MAP studies. I mean, they're very much central to the body of literature that we have there, and so yeah, that's quite a useful basis. And a lot of the people that are using these support packages, I know that they are leaning on the MAPS protocol because so many thousand people have gone through that and there is such reasonably detailed measurement of the responses, both in terms of unwanted side effects and positive therapeutic outcomes. So that's really quite useful to have that. But yeah, most of the concerns revolve around either the effects on serotonergic toxicity or of dopaminergic. And in that regard, it is difficult to take much from the research, because when we look into that for the reasons I've outlined, it's so heavily based on mega doses over multiple days in a row, which would have absolutely no reflection on the course of action that would be used therapeutically. Equally, there's research from 2016, Vegting et al., and that's very interesting to speak of the body of literature that shows that actually this may not be a classic neurotoxicity that we see even at these higher doses, that actually it's the depletion of the serotonin, and that was based on a lack of microglial activation when rats were sacrificed after being given particularly high doses, and equally on the actual protein levels of the serotonin transporter, which is always the focal point of these studies that use radioactive isotopes to see how much binding do we get at those transporters. And what they found that, it was actually just a depletion of serotonin after some seriously massive doses. So that's an interesting.
What is that? What is the implication of that? That no, it's not neurotoxicity for the person taking it. If we generalize, then that means we're depleting serotonin, but that's something that's going to regenerate, or that's not something that is actually as damaging as they make it out to be.
The takeaway is that I am not here to advise anybody on the use of Class A drugs. Please ensure that you adhere to the local regulations that are operational in your country, because your government cares about you and they have only got your interests at heart. But there could be a question. There could be a question to be asked about the role of 5-HTP supplementation the morning following. Something that I haven't actually seen investigated in the literature, but certainly I know from speaking with one particularly good friend who confided in me that he just loves MDMA, and he's like, it always gives me the lowest feeling you can imagine. I call it Suicide Tuesdays, but it's worth it in order to feel what I feel when I'm on it. And I said, that sounds like you have a disproportionate relationship with serotonin. The discussion was made as to whether 5-HTP might be a helpful addition. In any case, it was only a couple of months later that I received some very much glowing feedback about what that had done and how there was no drop-off in mood afterwards, which, of course, was particularly interesting. And that's something that I have since heard from several others. So, mechanistically, it makes a lot of sense. And anecdotally, it's showing some very interesting effects. So, that's definitely some points that are worth considering when it comes to what is actually happening when you give mega doses for several days in a row to rats, but also, what's happening when you have one reasonable average dose in humans. We would expect there to be depletion of serotonin. So that is one concern. The other concern is as to dopamine, and in this regard, I'll get technical just for a second. So in
Sure.
any dopaminergic or serotonergic cell, the way that they operate is that they actually fire out the neurotransmitters through structures called vesicles. They are essentially the gun that fires the neurotransmitter. So the dopamine is formed, it then migrates to this vesicle, and there's a particular transporter called the VMAT transporter, vesicular monoamine transporter, and that will move it into the vesicle where we want it to be. So that's all good and well. Now, things like MDMA will inhibit that transporter, and consequently you get a lot of serotonin or dopamine, depending on the type of cell, building up inside the cell, so much so that it forces a reverse action of the serotonin transporter on the cell surface, or the dopamine transporter on the cell surface. So whereas normally that would take up serotonin from the synapse so that it's no longer active, well, now it's working the opposite way. It's actually squeezing out everything that's building up in the cell, and so you get tons more in that synaptic space where it's active. That's the mode of mechanism. But the problem is with the dopamine is that the more dopamine you've got inside the cell, in the floaty space inside the cell called the cytoplasm, the more access it has to oxidation, specifically enzymes called monoamine oxidase that would inhibit, that would cause the conversion of dopamine into a more mischievous form called hydroxydopamine, which can then bind with other cell structures and cause oxidative stress, ultimately stopping the cell from firing effectively. And that is a mechanism that's involved in a lot of dopaminergic issues, for example, Parkinsonism. And so, yeah, that has always been a bit more of a theoretical concern for human beings. So the bulk of research shows that that process can cause neurotoxicity in mice when they are megadosed repeatedly. But it doesn't tend to play out in humans or rats or monkeys. That being said, this is where I think it's always important to recognize it hasn't played out in the subjects that have been studied. And people with metabolic issues, especially that involve hypoxia and oxygen management, because if it involves that, it involves copper. And if it involves copper, it involves this key enzyme called dopamine beta hydroxylase. That converts dopamine into noradrenaline. That onward conversion is key to avoid an undue buildup of dopamine in the cell, which could otherwise be problematic even at normal dosages. This is very, very theoretical. There is no evidence that this has ever been measured in people, but it is important to be cautious should you have disturbances in your dopamine pathway, especially if that coincides with poor copper status. And these are all things that can be measured very easily. Even the organic acids test, that first step, will give us a great idea of your actual dopamine status. So yeah, that's where certain individuals may well want to first tend to any metabolic challenges, or at least consider compensation in regards to monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And licorice roots, ginkgo biloba, rhodiola rosea, there's various other items, but they're the more common ones that have that inhibitory effect. So yeah, that is, yeah, as I said, it's important to communicate that that's not necessarily been shown in the literature. There's 3 case studies that show dopaminergic issues in individuals that had once been taking MDMA. It's relevant that in each case they didn't respond the way that they were expected to levodopa or seleginine or the other usual medications they would use. In other words, there were metabolic differences in these individuals that marked them out from others. They were not progressing and responding in the same way, but they did have some sort of issues that predisposed them to dopaminergic toxicity. So, yeah, we can only hypothesize as to, does that mean that these extreme cases could be affected? it's a hypothesis. It's a worthy consideration, and like everything, I anticipate that 10 years from now there will be some very well-established research on this.
Well, first of all, I understood absolutely all of that. And my takeaway here, your words, not mine, would be fuck the government and do as much drugs as you like, kids. So that's
an interesting interpretation,
right? No, but okay. So based on the research that we currently have, nothing really beats the MAPS 3 to 5 weeks recommendation, in your opinion.
Well, it's hard to find any protocol in any area of human health that has been so carefully constructed, so well tested, and delivers such impressive results. So, yeah, I think that there is always space for people to, A, look at the bulk of the evidence and what it's actually telling us, ignoring the hype and the PR that certain agencies may well want to convey, but equally recognizing that it's never a black and white thing, and that we all have individual differences in our biochemistry that are worthwhile taking into consideration should you have anything extreme going on. But beyond that, common sense applies, as always.
Yeah.
And I do not advocate the use of any illegal substances under any circumstances, because that would be wrong.
I was joking, of course. And,
of course. It's important that all the kids know that.
I think I've heard you say on some early Twitter account or something else, I think you called yourself the champion of common sense, which I thought was funny.
If the hat fits.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to end on where can people find out more about you? What do you got going on? Whatever you want to share here.
So I have my websites. I believe you mentioned it earlier, marekdoyle.com. So if you like any of the ideas that I've expressed here, I've got a number of articles on there that will likely follow a similar pattern. I've also got my training courses for practitioners coming up. I have a module on structuring a treatment plan going out in mid-October. And that very much focuses on how do we go about helping this human being, and does intertwine with some of the ideas we've discussed here, what weighting to place behind the physiology, the psychology, and how to measure the contributing impact of each. So, yes, if that's of any interest, then there's information there, marekdoyle.com/academy. Other than that, that's the main focus for me professionally. I should just continue to work, play with my boy, and sleep. That's what I have going on repeat otherwise.
That sounds great. And also in true Love Island spirit, I think you have an Instagram account as well, right?
Oh, I do. Yeah. So let's not forget the Instagram account. So that's Marek Doyle Nutrition. So again,
right. Cool.
If people like information and occasional sarcasm, then hopefully I can help them out.
Well, always great talking to you, man.
Likewise.
Appreciate you a lot. Thanks for coming on again.
No worries. See you on number 4, whenever that may be.
Oh, for sure. Take care, my friend.